By day, Frank Walker was invisible. Wearing a patched gray shirt and carrying a mop, he moved through the grand concert hall like a ghost. No one really noticed the janitor. Not the performers tuning their violins, not the stagehands hanging lights high above, and certainly not the patrons who filled the plush red seats every evening. Frank didn't mind. He kept quiet, did his job diligently, and stayed out of the way. But Frank had a secret, one that no one could ever know. When the last audience member filed out, when the stage lights dimmed, when the city outside turned quiet, Frank's shift was far from over. As he cleaned the sprawling empty concert hall, he always lingered near the enormous Steinway piano that sat center stage. The piano towered over him like a forbidden treasure, its polished ebony exterior gleaming under the faint glow of the remaining chandelier. On nights when his heart was particularly restless, Frank couldn't resist the temptation. With trembling hands, he'd glance over his shoulder to ensure no one was around. Then he'd slide onto the bench, as if entering another world. His rough, calloused fingers, accustomed to gripping mops and dustcloths, would gently hover over the ivory keys, and then music. The moment Frank began to play, the harsh realities of his life melted away. His fingers moved gracefully, pouring out melodies that spoke of yearning and hope, of dreams unfulfilled but alive and pulsing. The music wasn't perfect. Frank had never had a formal lesson after all, but it was full of raw beauty, the kind that came straight from the soul. What Frank didn't know was that on one fateful night, someone else was listening. Amelia Carter, an internationally renowned pianist, had returned to the concert hall to retrieve a forgotten scarf. As she stepped inside, the sound of Debussy's Clair de Lune floated to her across the empty space. It wasn't polished, but it was achingly beautiful. She followed the sound, her curiosity growing with each step, until she came to the auditorium doors and froze. There, bathed in the faint glow of the chandelier, was Frank, the janitor, lost in his music. She didn't speak until he had finished, letting the last note linger in the air. When she clapped softly, Frank shot to his feet, mortified. The bench scraped loudly as he stumbled away from the piano. "I'm sorry!" he stammered, his face flushing deep red. I shouldn't have—" "Wait," Amelia said firmly, silencing his apologies. "Was that you? That was incredible." Frank shook his head. No, ma'am, I was just messing around. I'm no musician." Amelia stepped closer, her eyes filled with something Frank couldn't decipher. Kindness, admiration, maybe even disbelief. "You're wrong. My whole life is music, and I can tell you that what I heard just now wasn't ordinary. You have a talent, a gift." Frank's protests died in his throat. For the first time, he looked up, meeting Amelia's gaze. Could she really mean it? All his life, Frank had kept his music to himself, afraid that it wasn't good enough, that he wasn't good enough. But here was one of the greatest pianists in the world, standing before him, telling him otherwise. Over the next several weeks, Amelia changed Frank's life. She arranged lessons for him, introduced him to her colleagues, and eventually helped him land a spot in a local performance showcase. Frank's hidden gift, once concealed under years of janitorial work, finally had a chance to flourish. By the end of that year, Frank wasn't just the janitor with a talent. He was a musician, one who proved that even the quietest dreams could one day sing.